Okay, so we've talked about Descartes, and we've talked about Rousseau, we've talked about social contract theory, natural man, savage man, progress, all of this great stuff. And some of that's going to culminate in our discussion of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is a really complex text. It's a little longer, so I've given us 2 weeks to sort of work through this one. And so I have kind of a lot of lecture material to go over because it's not really my style to just say like, well, here's the plot of Frankenstein, have fun figuring it out for yourself. I want to just sort of clue you into some of the things that we look for when we look at this text. It's super important to look at it from the right perspective, because it's not just it's a wonderful work of literature, but there's also some really deep meaning in there as well. So the essential questions that we deal with when we're looking at Frankenstein, the first one is, how has the Enlightenment failed us? And so we look at this from the perspective of the Romantic movement. This is our example of Romanticism. So I'll talk more about it, but Romanticism is the sort of intellectual movement that comes after the Enlightenment, and it's very critical of the Enlightenment. We talked a little bit about that with Rousseau, and we'll get into more detail with this set of lectures. So a really important question is whether the values and ideals of the Enlightenment are sufficient to capture the range of human experience, whether they accurately capture human experience. And if that's a really vague question, I understand that. We'll talk more about it. Obviously, with Frankenstein, we're dealing with what the negative results of the new science are, right? So now that we have gained all this scientific knowledge from the Copernican revolution, and we can become the masters and possessors of our universe, we've got this new way of approaching the world. What does that mean for us? Is it a good idea that we are sort of going gung-ho with science and trying to do all these crazy experiments? That's a question to ask. And then finally, we're going to look a lot at man's relationship with nature and what it is, what it should be. Those are really important questions for dealing with this text. So we've talked about the Enlightenment. We've talked about Descartes as a text that you don't really put in the Enlightenment, but it is sort of exemplary of a lot of what the Enlightenment is all about. And then Rousseau comes along, he's really critical of the Enlightenment. But I want to give you sort of a checklist of, like, if this is an Enlightenment text, here are some of the features it's going to have. Enlightenment thinkers definitely put a lot of faith into the scientific explanation of the world. So their emphasis is always on logic. It's always on reason. Remember that these people are the product of the scientific revolution. They've been burned by knowledge that, turned out to not be correct before. So they're really interested in using science to arrive at some kind of certain knowledge, and using the human powers of logic and reason in conjunction with that. Enlightenment thinkers very much appreciate the elegant and the refined. Their focus is on, like, the practicality of a text. So, it's hard to say that without seeing a bunch of examples, but Rousseau's text is designed neatly and it all kind of fits into boxes. And I don't know, if you had read John Locke, it would be way more obvious, I think. But it's, how is this text going to be useful, not how is this text going to be aesthetically pleasing or beautiful. The Enlightenment is didactic, and that just means that there is this constant search for truth and for answers. People are always studying; they're always trying to arrive at the truth of an issue. The Enlightenment is also very masculine, and it's not just that men are doing the writing, although that's true, but because the focus is always on the intellect, and that's a quality that unfortunately is typically associated with masculinity. We'll talk more about that later on in the semester when we get to Virginia Woolf, but that's just a thing to know. Enlightenment thinkers believe, as we have seen already, that nature can be harnessed. It can be controlled by humans. So Descartes says we should use all this knowledge to become the masters and possessors of nature. Although the weapon of the Enlightenment is criticism, which we've talked about already, Enlightenment thinkers don't do a lot to really shake up the status quo. They don't challenge it as much as some movements that occur a little later. So we're talking about Romanticism because Frankenstein is an example of Romantic literature, but it's also an example of Gothic literature, which is a subgenre of Romanticism. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But so I've defined the Enlightenment for you. Now let me define Romanticism. Well, we're talking about this late 18th to mid-19th century European movement that it's not just about books and philosophy and stuff, but it also includes art and music and philosophy and theology and politics. So it's widespread. It is a reactionary movement, and although it does reject a lot of the ideas of the Enlightenment, it embraces some of them too. So it's not totally antithetical to the Enlightenment. Some important people in Romanticism are people like Goethe and Emerson. Caspar David Friedrich is a painter. He's important. Wordsworth is a poet, and Coleridge and Keats. I'll show you a little bit of Coleridge's stuff in a minute, but if you've heard those names before, great. If not, don't worry about them. I'm just trying to give you a point of reference. What the Enlightenment thinkers are really getting attacked on here is their marriage to reason, right? The fact that they are so wedded to the idea of human reason being the most important part of humanity. And the Romantic thinkers really believe that there's way more to us than just this reasoning capacity. So they want to give a more holistic picture of human life that includes feelings and intuitions and imagination. Not just that we have these and that, oh, it's great and it's a part of being a human, but that feeling and intuition can be important as sources of knowledge. Like we can arrive at facts about the world through our intuitions and through our feelings. So reason, remember Descartes thinks that, he's like, I want to persuade you to be guided by the powers of your reason and nothing else. Well, the Romantic thinkers say, no, there are way more ways of arriving at knowledge. Reason is just one way of arriving at truths about the world, and sometimes it's not the best way anyway. You'll see some discussion sometimes about the Romantic movement coinciding with the Age of Revolution, right? The American Revolution and the French Revolution, and that actually has to do with this shift in social and political thought that we have kind of seen start with Rousseau and move on a little bit. And it encompasses people who are relying not on reason and facts to guide their opinions, but on their emotions to help them determine what's right. So the French Revolution is a really good example of that, but I don't need to go into that one at all. Another thing about Romanticism that's really important is the way that it rejects the formal and the mainstream, the upper class kinds of writing. So in the Enlightenment, people are writing treatises. Now you probably you've read Descartes and you've read Rousseau, and it sounds super boring, right? It's like, this is not an interesting text. But now we get to read a novel, which is really cool. It's not an accident that we're reading a novel when we discuss Romanticism, because the Romantics prefer works like poetry and novels that actually express human emotions, experiences in plain and simple language. So that's important too. The writers of the Romantic movement, you often see them sort of deal with like a dream world or like idealized visions of the past that are meant to be more just magical, like more picturesque than the current world, which is the boring industrial age full of, budding like factories and machinery and stuff like that. So Romanticism is meant to be more organic. One of the big emphases in the Romantic movement is the idea that individual freedom is best expressed through self-expression, right? Through passionate self-expression, through art and music. So the Romantics really criticize how mechanistic the Enlightenment thinkers were, right? We've talked about Descartes' vision of like this mechanistic universe where everything operates like a clock. Humans and nature are part of this mechanistic universe, and the Romantics just reject this view. They think no, nature is better understood in developmental and organic terms. That's a see Mill next week, but we're not going to discuss Mill. So instead of seeing people and nature as a clockwork or a machine, the Romantics see something else in nature. They see the magical and the terrible, the things that, stir our emotions. They see the beautiful and the sublime. They see the divine and the demonic. So I'll stop this one right here, and in the next set of lectures for Frankenstein, we're going to talk about the idea of the sublime.